All right, so how's everyone doing? If I'm imagining right now, I'm probably streaming to nobody except for myself, but that's okay. It's the start of the stream. So this time I'm gonna do something a little different than I usually do. Instead of doing like a Q&A, I wanted to kind of maybe do like a mini lecture type thing where I could discuss some thoughts and ideas that I have in relation to MBTI and how the MBTI personality types are kind of structured and why I think that there are some issues in the structuring, issues that I think the community is aware of, but I wanted to propose an alternative model. But okay, so you can hear me, that's good. Let's hop into what I wanted to talk about today. Hello, Kyle, by the way. Hello, Vel. Uh, hello, spam. Spam chat bot person. I don't know if I can delete those. Um, so, MBTI types. What is wrong with how they are structured and organized? That's what I want to talk about today. What's wrong with how MBTI types are labeled? Specifically, this is something that Socionics does decently well, as opposed to MBTI. A lot of people think that the MBTI labels can be a little bit confusing because we have, say, for example, an INTJ personality type. And what's wrong with the INTJ label when we first look at it? Well, INTJs are not judging dominant types. They're perceiving dominant types. They lead with introverted intuition, which is a perception function. And this can be an issue. So then we look at Socionics, and Socionics would label the INTJ as an INTP. That says, okay, they're introverted, they're intuitive, they're thinking types, and they lead with perception, which kind of points us in the direction of intuition. If you know what all these things are and what they mean, essentially. So I was kind of thinking earlier today, in the past few days, like, what is a different system that we could use to label the types if we theoretically wanted to change it? Let's say we just wanted to throw the current labeling system out and take the same cognitive functions that we have in MBTI, the same cognitive functions, and kind of turn them into a new system of labeling. Now, this isn't something that I'm actually going to adopt. This is just a thought experiment to get us kind of thinking. So here in a minute, I'm going to switch over to a screen, but let me pull some stuff up first. I think one of the primary issues that we face, especially in the MBTI community, is with those introverted types and how they are reversed. You know, the INTJ being a judging type is often too much what people think of when they think of the INTJ. They think of the INTP as being the perceiving type, and they forget that INTPs are actually quite firm in their decisions as judging dominant types. They're not types who are going to be wishy-washy all over the place when it comes to what they think is true. Their introverted thinking frameworks tend to be exceptionally strong. So let me see. Let me go over here. Okay, so I've switched to a new screen. Let me know, can you all still hear me? Are you all still able to hear me? If anyone is here. If not, that's fine too. Let me bring up Twitch on my other screen, and I'll test my audio myself. Okay, yeah, it works. That's fine. Great. Great. Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate it. Great. Awesome. So, when we're thinking about MBTI types, if we wanted to theoretically relabel the types, how would I go about it? Again, this is just going to be kind of my general thought process here. And this is probably not the right or best way either. This is just how I would go about it if I wanted to relabel the types. So another issue when we're thinking about a type, like even like an ENTJ, what does the ENTJ say right off the bat about the type in terms of what that kind of person is? What is, like, to an outsider, would they know what an ENTJ leads with function-wise? Even if they understood all of the letters that make up the ENTJ, extroversion, intuition, thinking, judging, would they know that an ENTJ leads with thinking? Well, no, because first they'd have to understand that the J points to, you know, the lead function as well as the energy of the first attribute. They would have to understand that extroversion is important, and then judging is also important. That points towards extrovert judging being the dominant function. And this is an issue because, well, if we wanted someone to know right off the bat, what does this person lead with? Well, that's an issue. So that kind of brings me to the idea of attitudinal psyche. I don't know if you've ever heard of that system. I made a video about it a while back. They kind of had this idea. I really think it's good. I'm going to pull it up on the screen here if I can. Attitudinal psyche. They have the idea of labeling the letters in order of kind of strength, essentially. So your first letter would be your one that you're confident with. The second, you would be flexible. Third would be insecure, and fourth is unconcerned. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting because if you have these four letters that stand for something, and then you rank order them essentially, you'd be very close to what we have in MBTI in terms of cognitive functions, because we have four cognitive functions and they exist in a 1, 2, 3, 4 order. The only thing that we would have to differentiate is what the individual's energy is, or which direction their conscious is facing. So an introvert or an extrovert. So that's where I kind of came up with the idea of, so say for example we wanted to do an INTJ. Why could an INTJ not be, well, is the text here? Why no text? It's probably because I have it set to 150 point. That is exactly the issue. Why is my text at 150? Let's change that to black, and let's change it to 16. Oh goodness, what have I done? I'll tell you what, let's delete this layer. Delete. And let's start new with the settings that we have now. Okay, I know I have it set to black. Why is it not? Forgive me for being technically inept. I will figure this out eventually. There we go. Change. 9 point. Is it in black? Okay, yes. There we go. Photoshop. Why you do this to me? 9 point. All right, so where was I? Why could the INTJ not be something kind of... Oh my goodness, I'm actually dumb. What have I done? Oh no. I'm so bad at Photoshop. What did I do? I've literally never done this before. I'll delete it again, I swear. I will. I'll just go back. Okay, delete it again. F. F for me failing at this. Don't have repressed extroverted sensing, kids. It's not good for your heart. Okay, so why can the INTJ, I'm going to put it there so I don't lose it this time. Why could the INTJ not be something akin to the intuitive first, thinking second, feeling third, sensing type, NTFS, and then maybe spice it up with something like I. So this is just theoretical. We're not doing anything, super fancy here. What does the NTFS-I say about this type? Let's say you know what intuition, thinking, feeling, and sensing are. You've spent 5 minutes learning the basics of a type. The NTFS-I tells you that this type is intuition first, thinking second, feeling third, sensing fourth, and then that their dominant energy is introversion. Now, to me, this is something that it would seem weird at first, but I think it would be easier to adopt for certain people. Now, again, I'm just spitballing here, so if you have ideas for how you would label the types, I'd love to hear them in the comments, or I'm probably going to upload this as a YouTube video as well. Because issues with standard MBTI. I'm an awful person type. Issues with standard MBTI types. Introverts are backwards in terms of J/P. We don't know what the lead function is without knowing a lot about the theory. Right. That's a great point, Kyle. It's kind of the issue with the Myers-Briggs 16 type isn't the cognitive functions themselves, it's that the labeling is inefficient, in my opinion. And maybe this is just TE being like, hey, we could do this better. but I think that it's inherently just not the best way that we could view types. Now, I don't think it's going to change for a long time because people love the 16 types as they are now. But I do think it's fun to theorize about it. And I wish that I could do this. I should have made that its own thing. You know what? We're going to cheat. We're going to Control C and Control C, Control V. And then I'm going to get rid of this. And then I'm going to get rid of this. And then I'm going to move this over here. Right. So what benefit does a system like this have over traditional MBTI? So INTJ is not a judging dominant type. We don't know what the lead function is. There is no specific stuff for it. And again, this is something that, oh no, I lost my, that's what I lost. I lost my taskbar on the bottom. Oh no. Windows? Does anyone know the button to make the taskbar stay? Because I hit a button that made it go away, and I don't know it. Yeah, I think you're right. They do like the simplicity of what the 16 personality side gives them, and that's why they kind of had that extra letter at the end, the assertive turbulent. Now, assertive turbulent is used to describe neuroticism in terms of Big Five, because the 16personalities.com website is essentially just a very pseudo Big Five system that they turned into MBTI, which is kind of an issue because, like, yes, there's correlations between certain things, but openness and intuition are not the same thing, and they like directly correlate openness as being intuition. Whereas you can have, for example, extroverted sensing types, extroverted sensing high types who are exceptionally open. Artists, athletes even can be very open. There's quite a few people in the extroverted sensing realm who tend to score highly on openness, because openness to experience is actually something that intuitive types tend to be relatively low on. Intuitive dominant types tend to be very open to ideas and novel things and interests, but they're very usually reluctant to engage in new experiences, especially introverted intuitive dominants, which is why occasionally you'll even find INTJs or INFJs who score like median or low on openness, and it's because they struggle with new experiences, going to new places, these sorts of things. And this is going to be one of the issues that 16 personalities faces. But again, kind of back to this idea here. And again, if any of you know the button to get the taskbar to come back up, made taskbar disappear. Let's do a quick Google search. Let's use the TE. I don't know. I'll figure it out later. I don't even think I could close Photoshop if I wanted to. Here, let's save as, and we'll close this because that's going to drive me crazy if I don't get that fixed real quick. Welcome to the Surapsych technical difficulty show. Yes, I have Sasuke as my wallpaper because I thought it was cool on the live wallpapers of Photoshop. Animated wallpapers, by the way, wallpaper engine. It's on Steam if you don't have it. It's real cool. Back to the idea. So, yeah, so the attitudinal psyche, I really like this system they have where they kind of rank order what everything is. There we go. We fixed it. Awesome. This time I'll try not to smack my face into my keyboard. By the way, thanks for tuning in, for everyone. Hugh, is it Hugh? Kyle, Bill. So again, I've said it 5 times. Back to what we were talking about here. With a system like this, where we're kind of rank ordering the functions, we can then go into further theory about what it means for the functions to be in those positions. So, I'm going to enlarge. I'm going to undo what I just did there. Okay, we're going to enlarge this to a little bit 14. Kind of center it. I'll move this over here. So What did I enlarge it to? 14. Okay, so first letter. What does the first letter mean? Like, say in this system, what does the first letter mean? First letter is in MBTI dominant function. Direction of energy is determined by the -I or -E. So what we can then do is immediately assume that if the first one is -I or -E, that it will then go in a checkerboard kind of motion afterwards. So it'll be, ping pong is essentially what I mean. If first letter is I, second is E, third is I, fourth is E. Opposite if first letter is E. Right? Not too confusing. Right off the bat, we can kind of understand. So that means that for this specific type, make another text box. Of course, it goes to, why did it go to 2.8? I don't even, whatever. So the NTFS-I has NI, TE, FISE. Second, fourth, I-E. So what would then the NTFS-E look like? NETI FESI equal MBTI ENTP. That's one of the things that we were kind of struggling with in MBTI as well. Is I think the dominant function is such an important part of the psyche that we're kind of ignoring its importance when we don't make it shine in some sense. When we don't make it immediately apparent that it's the thing that leads the type. What do an ENFP and an INTJ have in common? This is a question that I like to ask people that I don't think a lot of people know like fully understand why these two types probably get along as well as they do. Well, an ENFP and an INTJ are both intuitive dominant types. They lead with intuition, and they share extroverted thinking and introverted feeling. Therefore, they're the two intuitions that they have are opposite. So one's interested in internal ideas and kind of the more depth aspect, while the other tends to be connecting the ideas around in the world around them. But then they use those ideas for the same purposes, and they're very balanced on thinking and feeling. So ENFPs and INTJs tend to get along very well because they're extremely similar in cognition. They're both intuitive dominant types with a value for extroverted thinking and introverted feeling. So it becomes an issue when we kind of start to think that like ENFPs and INTJs, for example, are very, very different because, even just for, say, for example, one of them's an extrovert, one of them's an introvert. You kind of miss the point that it's the intuition that is the primary characteristic of the personality as opposed to the extroversion or the introversion. Now, a lot of people would kind of heuristically, introversion and extroversion is one of the first things that we notice when we're looking at people and personality, which in my opinion is why it makes sense that when we labeled the MBTI types, we started with, INTJ, for example, they're an introvert right off the bat. We know introvert, INTJ. But at the same time, is it more important to know that that person's an introvert, or is it more important to know that they're a thinking dom, or an intuitive dom, or a sensing dom? I would rather, if I had to pick, if I was going to go blindfolded, or I had a phone call with someone, and they said you could know one characteristic about their personality, what would I pick? Well, for me, it would be, I'd want to know whether or not they're a sensing, thinking, intuitive, or feeling dominant type. And if I couldn't have the extroversion or introversion portion of that, I would rather have that over, I would rather have the intuition, thinking, sensing, feeling over whether or not that function was introverted or extroverted. Because that's going to tell me more about their personality and their values. For one, if they're an intuitive or sensing dominant, they're a perceiving dominant. I immediately know that they're going to be generally more open-minded about their decisions. They're not going to be as decisive when it comes to things that are important to them, and you don't have to worry as much about kind of skirting around decisions. So essentially, the judging and rational dominant types, because they come to rational conclusions, are going to be far more decided in their actions and their decisions and their logic and their feelings and all these sorts of things. With the perceiving dominant type, they're the opposite, where they prefer not to come to decisions unless they have to. So if I know someone's a perceiving dominant type, intuition or sensing, then I can communicate with them in such a way that I know that they're going to be relatively open to new information, as opposed to making decisions on that information. Now, if I know they're a judging dominant type, a thinking or a feeling type, I know that I should be more careful if I'm going to make any definitive claims. This is right or wrong. I think you should do this. You should do this or that. These are claims that you typically don't want to make if you had the choice when you're discussing with rational dominant types, because it's going to be an issue, because you're pushing on their way of understanding or knowing. And unless you can extremely back that up, or back that up with extreme confidence, they're usually going to push back on you against that. But it's not as much the case with perceiving dominants, who prefer to take in information, process it for a little bit, and then make their decision. I find that with perceiving dominant types, it's more like you're giving them suggestions, and they can push back a little bit. But they're more so stingy about their way of kind of doing things, as opposed to their understanding, their path, their purpose, their interests, these sorts of things. Like, they don't want to be bothered when they're doing things, for example. That's kind of besides the point. But anyway, this goes back to the point where I think it's important, when we're looking at MBTI types, to recognize that the dominant function is the most important aspect of the personality. And therefore, if it was more apparent in the 16 types, we would have less of these heuristic struggles that are present in our current understanding of types. Again, looking at an INTJ, we don't know that the INTJ is an intuitive dominant type. We just know that they're an introverted, intuitive, thinking, judging type. If we say, for example, switch to a system where it was like this, NTFS-I, we would immediately see that they lead with intuition as a function. So the first, I already put it over there. I'm going to make this text a little smaller. And then I'll go from there. 10, first letter MBTI dominant function. Direction of energy is determined by the IE. Right. So what is the second and third letter / functions? So let's talk about another big misinterpretation that people have in MBTI, in that they assume that the second function is like really strong, essentially. Like when you look at an INTJ, a lot of people think that they're an intuitive thinker. When you have the 4-letter system set up in the way that we do, like INTJ, it shows a clear preference for thinking over feeling. When if you look at the original Jungian interpretation, I'm going to bring up the image here. Give me a second. If you've watched my channel, you've seen this image 1,000 times, but I think it's super important, so I'm going to bring it up again. Open Sesame. Right. This image here, this was Jung's illustration of the psyche in terms of functions. You'll see that, this is a thinking dominant type. This thinking dominant type has a clear and strong preference for thinking and a clear dispreference for feeling, but sensation and intuition are relatively even. And this is something that is miscategorized, by the current MBTI system. When we talk about an INTJ, we're saying that this is a type that has a clear thinking preference over feeling. When instead, if you're someone who's an intuitive dominant type, your center 2 functions are actually going to be relatively balanced. There's not going to be this huge, clear, distinct preference for thinking over feeling. It's going to be slight, and it's not going to be 80-20, it's going to be 60-40. So when we talk about the center 2 functions, if we were to relabel them, I'm just going to put the image down for now. You kind of get the point. You'll understand that these center 2 functions are relatively balanced with a slight preference. And that's one thing that the attitudinal psyche system does as well. they kind of have a label for each of the 4 letters in the order that they're in. So confident, in MBTI, we would see this as, your first function, you're pretty confident. I wouldn't describe the MBTI first function as confident. I would describe it as like the natural or inherent function, as in it's something that we very much recognize within ourselves, but it's not something we have to put energy into. The dominant function is just very natural to us. Now, the second and third functions are going to be the functions that are going to be relatively balanced and important within us, and there's going to be push and pull between them. That's really important. Push and pull between these 2 functions. Your average ENFP, INTJ, ENTP, intuitive dominant type, for example, is going to struggle when it comes to the thinking and feeling realm more than the intuition and sensing realm on a daily basis, because their mind recognizes both of these things as important. An INTJ doesn't recognize sensation as important on a daily basis. Will an INTJ sometimes recognize their TE more than their NI because NI is so natural to them? Yes. So this kind of goes back to the idea that extroverted thinking is an extroverted function, and it exists in the unconscious part of your mind, which sounds odd, right? Because if you're an INTJ, you're like, oh, extroverted thinking is pretty natural to me. I'm an INTJ, and this again is kind of miscategorized because your conscious psyche is introverted. So therefore, NI and FI are your conscious functions, whereas TE and SE are your unconscious functions. Now, TE exists in this really healthy, unique spot where it bridges the gap between consciousness and unconsciousness, and that way you can use it without becoming super stressed. I describe my extroverted thinking as a sword that I carry on my hip. It's something that I recognize that I'm unsheathing and using to complete a task or a goal, but immediately after I'm done with it, it's like, that was kind of tiring, let me put that away. It's just like when I get on live streams, here I am talking to you, I'm kind of blurting out all of my TE knowledge, my understanding, how I would do things, what I think is efficient. And after this live stream, I'll probably go rest because this is extremely tiring for me to do this type of thing, even though I enjoy it. The auxiliary function is something that takes conscious effort because it's in your unconscious attitude, if that makes sense. You have to use conscious effort to pull it up and use it. It comes naturally at times, especially when you need it. It's going to be very easy for you to kind of use this function in a way that's going to help you achieve your goal. They call it the tool, this sort of thing. But it's always going to be inherently different from your natural way of doing things, your natural introverted method, and therefore you'll notice when it's happening. NI, or your dominant function, some of the systems propose that you don't notice that it's there, and I don't completely agree with this because I think you should be relatively aware of your dominant function if it's how you live most of your life. But it's so present in your actions that it's not like it stands out to you, if that makes sense. It's just who you are. So you don't notice it in terms of like, oh, it stands out, but you do notice it because it's how you live your life. If I ask a TE Dom versus a TI Dom questions about how they go about doing their activities and understanding things, they'll both pretty clearly be able to tell me the differences in how they prefer to take in information and rationalize things. But at the same time, because it's so natural to them, they'll say, I am like this, or this is how I am, or this is how I prefer to, instead of, sometimes when I'm doing this, I switch to this, or I have this way of going about learning new things. We usually hear the auxiliary or secondary function as being the function that is going to be something that we kind of switch into for a temporary period of time to accomplish some sort of goal, and then we kind of come back from it. Or it represents us when we're excited, like INTPs, for example. INTPs tend to, when they get excited, they go from TI to NE. They go around switching between ideas and interests and things of that nature. And then once they've grabbed all the little interests that matter to them, they go back into TI and analyze these things. Where it's the opposite for an ENTP, where an ENTP is constantly hopping around. And when they need some sort of goal or thing accomplished, they stop to analyze. So that's how you can kind of see the difference between the tool function or auxiliary functions between types, as if you need to stop to use it, or if that's how you're naturally doing things, essentially. I know that was kind of a jump around. Kyle, you said recently led me to getting confused thinking I might be an ENTJ, but I managed to confirm that you think you're an INTJ. And I can be discreet. Yeah, it doesn't stand out. And INTJs are going to be far more like Zen in 90% of their day. They're usually very laid back, receptive people, whereas ENTJs tend to be very direct. I have not met many ENTJs or TE DOMs in general who are not relatively direct and focused in their communication. INTJs are direct and focused as well, but they're also relaxed and laid back. And I usually don't get the chill factor from ENTJs. All right, so back to where I was with the lecture type thing. Why would an INTJ in his teens still be a bit similar to his adult version? I mean, you're of course going to be more the same than you are different, unless you have some sort of huge change. But that, that's really just going to depend on you and your personality. There's nothing wrong with being the same, quote unquote, as long as you've grown and you're realizing the mistakes that you've made and things that need to be done to overcome the issues that you've had in life. All right, so back to the lecture for a minute. I'll answer some more questions if there are more here in a second. So the second and third letter, again, relatively balanced. There's going to be a slight preference for the second over the third. Now, we could go in and kind of label the second and third function. So let's try it. Let's try doing like the labeling system. So I'm going to create a new text box for this, actually. First function equal natural. Natural, dominant. So it's going to come very naturally to you. Your second function. Oh, I have to do caps in our way. Second function. Tool / use. / what's another good way to put this? There's some ego and identity attached to the second function as well. So what do I mean by that? What do I mean that the second function has some identity or ego attached to it? Because while there is some preference almost for the third function because it's in the conscious attitude, your auxiliary function often represents as kind of, because it's your tool, it's like, what do I want to be seen as? Or what do I want other people to think I'm kind of good as? Or what are my general interests going to gravitate towards? So let's say you had a saw, like a saw for cutting through things. If you had a saw and you were hanging around a bunch of people who were smacking nails with a hammer, you'd probably feel out of place, and you probably wouldn't be too interested in trying to hang around with those people often. You don't have the correct tool for this specific environment, and therefore it's going to be a struggle for you to want to naturally adapt to that environment. So let's say TE is your saw. If you have TE as your auxiliary or tool function, you're naturally going to gravitate towards interests, environments, hobbies, and things around your identity that allow you to use this tool in an efficient and effective manner. So therefore, the auxiliary function is going to be something that gravitates you towards your identity a little bit. It's going to gravitate you towards what is interesting to you as a person because you have the correct tool to deal with that situation, to do the things you need to do within that environment. Now, the third function isn't exactly the same way. The third function we usually highly value. I always have described the third function as awkward for E, shy for introverts. So what do I mean by that? So for the extroverted types, the tertiary function, which is also extroverted, is usually something that they really like to show or they want to be known for, but they're awkward at it. They're not bad at it. It's not repressed. It's not something that they're really like terrible at. They can do it, but it's kind of like it stands out a little. Have you ever talked to an ENTP and like you can see them trying to like force their FE, and it's like okay, like you're trying your best and I really appreciate it, but you don't have to do that. And it's not that they're so bad at it like they're an INTP where they're just disregarding the FE, like screw it, like whatever. They're really genuinely, honestly trying a lot of the times, but it comes off as kind of awkward. Or if you talk to, or you look at like an ENTJ or an ENFJ, and they try to do like partying, or they try to be SE type people, and they're trying to be super spontaneous, it comes off just a little bit weird. Like it's just a little bit weird that they're trying to be that spontaneous because it's really, it goes against their usual directive authority. So it's almost like it's the, I think, oh no, what did I do? Let's delete this layer. The third function provides contrast from the dominant in some sense. The third function provided it provides a contrast that is noticeable more often than not in someone's personality. So again, if you're an introverted intuitive dominant, if you switch into like using introverted feeling to process an emotion or deal with a situation, it's contrast, it stands out from your personality because it's not usual for you to do it. You're still within introversion, so it's like, okay, so they're still being themselves. It doesn't look really weird or anything, or like it doesn't look like super off-putting, but it's like something's right. Or something's not right here. Something feels different. If you see an INTJ and FI, you're like, what's going on? Or if you see an INFJ and TI, you're like, what's going on? Why are they being so critical? This isn't like their usual personality, this sort of thing. If you see an ENFJ and SE, you're like, what's going on here? And they can get better at it. That's one of the things that's really important about the tertiary function in general, is you can get better at it. And usually in your 30s and 40s, it goes from being awkward to being kind of somewhat natural. It'll never be as natural as your first function, but it's always going to be kind of, but you can improve upon it. Now, where was I going with this? Oh yeah, so let's talk about the shy for the introverts and how that compares from the awkward for the extroverts. So for the introverted types, their tertiary function is something that they don't want to show, whereas the extroverts kind of want to be known for their tertiary function and show it a little bit. The introverted types don't want to be known for their tertiary function. They want to hide it from the world because it's their almost like their insecurity or their hidden desire. It's like I strongly value FI, but I don't want the world to know that I value FI because look at this great TE tool that I have. Look how good I am at TE, right? TE, that's nice. And then the ENTJs are like, oh, great, you're doing TE. Now, FI is stupid. And then you go, okay, I don't want them to think I'm stupid because I like FI. So then you hide the FI. Or if you're an INFP, maybe you hide the SI just a little bit because you don't want other people to make fun of the interest that you have, the things that you collect, or the memories that you've shared, these sorts of things. But as you get older, that shyness turns to identity confidence. Just as for the extroverts, the awkwardness turns into confidence. It becomes more engraved in your personality, and it becomes more important. When an INTJ learns to adopt their tertiary function, they grow. And I think the tertiary function is the thing that's really important if you want to grow in general. Just the auxiliary and tertiary, the auxiliary axis, second and third function, are super important for developing your personality and developing yourself as an individual. So, short little recap. First function, natural dominant. Second, tool, use, identity. It's that thing that you're pretty good at and you want to be associated with the things that you're good at. You're going to spend more time being around things that you're good at. The third function is awkward for extroverts, shy for introverts. So what is the fourth function? Well, the fourth is our repressed function. Fourth. What does it mean to have a repressed function? Most of the times it's ignorant, or ignored is a better word. Ignored. Aspirational at times. Ignored but aspirational. Let's do that. So the fourth is the function that we really don't notice during the day in terms of we're not doing it, but we really notice that we don't have it. And I know that can be really conflicting. So it can be really easy to say, for an INTP, I know I'm not really great at people, but a lot of the times they're going to put in or try to put in conscious effort to try and be better with people. They want to have the better FE. A lot of the times you'll see INTJs who aspire to be athletes, or they do some sort of physical activity, or they try to be spontaneous, and it's because they're aspirational towards the extrovert sense. They wish deep down that they could have some sort of healthier connection with this function. And you'll actually find that more often than not, you can be good at the results that you want from your fourth function in your own different way. So if I was coaching an INTP, I wouldn't tell them to work on their FE. I would tell them to kind of like get better at communicating TI in a way that doesn't disrupt the FE. because you can get the same healthy FE response by just not disregarding the FE. You don't have to do the FE. You don't have to be an FE Dom to get that kind of result. You just have to make sure that you're being consciously aware that you're ignoring it a lot of the time. Just as with INTJs, you have to be consciously aware that you're ignoring your extroverted sensing, or that it's going to cause you a problem, and that you're going to struggle if you don't pay some sort of attention to it. The fourth function is the one that requires the most conscious effort to pay attention to, because it exists completely in your unconscious effort. So unconscious psyche. So if you want to go into the aspect of understanding your fourth function, you have to actually like put forth mental energy into thinking about this function. It's not something that just kind of passively happens like your dominant function. How would I tell an INFP to get more productive? With extroverted intuitive top 2 types, productivity is better if you space out your interest into periods or blocks of time where you can allow yourself to work on things, but you're not strictly defining yourself. So what do I mean by that? Well, NE top 2s will often do this thing where they try to schedule themselves. They try to essentially be like super SI, where they're like, all right, I'm going to do this in this hour, this in this hour, and I'm going to get this done here and this done here. And then they get super burnt out in like 3 days, because that is super unsustainable for a high extroverted intuitive dominant type. So my favorite way for extroverted to try to help extroverted intuitive types get along and do things is to have them space out their work periods in such a way that they can be doing something productive in a period of time, but they aren't strictly defined in that period of time. So say, for example, instead of at 1 o'clock, I'm going to do my home or my specific assignment or something. At 1 o'clock, you say, I'm going to spend 1 hour doing something productive related to the things that I needed to get done. And that way you're not forcing yourself to do one specific thing, because as soon as you put yourself into the one specific thing box, NE is going to be like, oh, I really don't want to do this. But if you get to that 1 o'clock and you're like, all right, I have 1 hour to do anything that I choose within this small spectrum of things that are that I have to get done, that's not always going to be interesting, but that I have to get done, then at least your NE is like, oh, I have a choice. And choices are nice. I like variety. And that way you're not forcing yourself to do the same thing day in and day out. I don't think SI routine / schedules are going to be healthy for extroverted intuitive dominant types. From personal experience, being consciously aware is quite a chore, especially when being aware disrupts your thinking process. Yeah. How would you tell ISFP and ISTP apart? ISTPs are far more stone-faced. Like, ISTPs are very rigid, whereas you don't get rigidness with ISFPs. ISFPs are expressive. ISTPs are usually very rigid. The ISTPs are infamous for this kind of look where they look like, what are you doing? Like, they look at you, it's because they have the TI backed up with the NI. Whereas NI is like eternally suspicious. If you're an introverted intuitive Dom, you're always questioning the motives and intentions of others in a healthy way, and that you're, there's a reason that Briggs and Young say that you can't really, it's really hard to deceive introverted intuitive Doms, because they're always trying to find out what you're doing or why you're doing things. They're nosy, essentially. It's like the ISTP has that in the 3rd slot, and it's feeding their TI. So they're suspicious about the rightness and wrongness of the actions that you're taking, in terms of the logic that they're thinking about. So they always give you like this weird, like, I don't understand your like process type of face. It's very common, is what I'm trying to say. But they're usually more rigid. ISFPs tend to be far more expressive, upbeat. Most ISFPs tend to be more upbeat. So back to this random mess of things on my screen that secretly say that I'm probably an INTP. No. So yeah, 4th function, ignored but aspirational. It's going to be something that you're not so great at, but it's something that if you put a lot of effort into, you can reduce the negative impact that it will have on your life, which is the most important thing you want to do for your repressed function. So let's map out what it would look like with all the types in this system, just to give people an idea. And it's going to take a minute. Okay. I did it. Let's get the spacing right as well. Make it easier. So maybe it'll just be easier if I ESFP, SFP, ENTJ, ESTJ. My brain is not working right now. ESFJ, ENFJ, ISTP, INTP. I already did ENTP. So that would be the, what am I missing? Do I have ISFJ? No, ISFJ, ISTJ. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. What am I missing? I have the oh no, I need the INFP. I should have put INFP up there. ESFP. You know what? Let's ESTP, INFP, ISFP. So I have the FEs. I have the FIs. INFJ. ENFP. I think that's 16, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Right, perfect. Probably should just reorganize these to... Yeah, let's just do that. That'll make it easier. INTJ and ENTP. So ESFP equal sensing, feeling, thinking, intuition, dash E. SFTN dash E. ESTP equals sensing, thinking, feeling, intuition, dash E. Pretty simple, right? Nothing too complex going on here. ENTJ equals thinking, intuition, sensing, feeling, dash E. ENTJ equals thinking, sensing, intuition, feeling, dash E. I know this is terribly exciting, just bear with me. ESFJ equal feeling, sensing, intuition, thinking, E. ENFJ equals feeling, intuition, sensing, E. ISTP equals thinking, sensing, intuition, feeling, dash I. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm gonna move these just to make my ADHD a little bit better. You're on the edge of your seat. I'm sorry, little. Is it literate crow or illiterate crow? I know this is the intuition, thinking, feeling, sensing, dash B. Intuition, feeling, thinking, sensing, dash B. Dash I. So if you have any questions, now is a good time to ask them. So after I finish this, I'll answer some questions. I'm just gonna finish typing these up real quick. So INTP equals intuition. No, sorry. Thinking, intuition, sensing, feeling, dash I. ISFJ equals sensing, feeling, thinking, intuition, dash I. Sensing, thinking, feeling, intuition, dash I. Feeling, intuition, sensing, thinking. Goodness gracious. This is giving me, my brain, an overload. My TI just can't handle it. My non-existent TI. ISFP equals feeling, sensing, intuition, thinking, dash I. That equals intuition, feeling, thinking, sensing, dash I. INTJ finally equals intuition, thinking, feeling, sensing, dash I. Okay. So this is what, like if I were to remake these 16 personality, like if I just had, if someone as a project was just like remake the 16 personality types, how would you do it? This is how I do it. Because I think that this, because of my reasoning here, is representative of why I think it would be a decent idea to do so. Because with this model, can you list any very easily definable and noticeable things that NI-DOMs will find themselves doing or thinking? Daydreaming. One of the biggest things that you can search for when you're looking for any of the introverted perceiving dominant types, this is going to be SI or NI, both of these types do this, is daydreaming. Remember, intuition does not equal abstract. Introversion equals abstract. Introversion is subjective and abstract, where extroversion is objective and fact-focused. Now, intuition is going to be a little bit more abstract because it is not grounded in sensory information compared to introverted sensing, but the introverted sensing dominant types are usually going to be quite abstract in their thinking as well, in terms of the fact that they like to daydream or think about things that are not 100% grounded in factual information like you would see, or factual kind of stimulus as you would see with the extroverted sensing types. Introverted sensing types tend to daydream about realistic things, whereas introverted intuitive types tend to daydream about unrealistic things. And what does that mean? Well, SI dominants tend to be more prone to wanting to, of course, remember things that are pleasant or remember experiences. They're all about kind of building and maintaining experiences so that they can maybe relive them. They might think about how an interaction that could very well happen in their life might play out. So say, for example, how a communication with a boss, loved one, family member might play out, and they might try to go through that a few times in their head. Introverted intuitive types can do this as well, but you'll find that when it comes to the more grounded or realistic aspect of it, the introverted sensing types are usually not going to expand far outside hypotheticals in their mind that don't relate to what is real to them in their life and environment. So they're not going to find themselves having imaginary debates with famous people, for example. Usually, it's not going to be something that's going to like cross their type of thinking. Whereas with the intuitive dominant types, you'll often find that they're trying to escape their own reality, especially the introverted intuitive dominant types. So they'll think about imaginary situations that are very disconnected from the reality in that they're in, or there'll be something that is so far ahead of the reality that they're in that they're ignorant of where they are in favor of where they could be. So they'll be daydreaming about something that could be happening 2 weeks from now, a month from now, years from now, that sort of thing. SI dominants tend to be more realistic in their imaginations. So you say you much prefer this new system? Again, this is just me kind of spitballing. I was in the shower earlier and I was like, well, what if I wanted to do this? So this is my, for fun model of what it would look like to recreate the MBTI 16 types. And we could go more into kind of like function dynamics here. Where did I go? So first letter, MBTI dominant function, direction of energy is determined. Yeah. Second and third letter / functions relatively balanced with a slight preference, push and pull between these two functions. This is really important. This is something that it needs to really be remembered. As the second and third functions, there's going to be push and pull between those functions. Fourth function. Something that we ignore on a day-to-day basis and stresses us out easily. Often secretly wish we were skilled at this function and may get jealous or angry towards people who are. So, yeah. That's kind of my summary there. Let me see. I'm trying to make sure I've covered all the things I want to cover. So the issues with the standard types. Introverts are backwards in terms of JP. Yep. You don't know what the leap function is without knowing a lot about the theory. Now, again, with this one, you would still have to learn what it means, and you would have to figure out the checkered board kind of approach here. But at the same time, in this one image here, you could kind of get the general idea of the system right off the bat. Like, it wouldn't take much to teach someone this system. You'd be able to figure it out in like 5 to 10 minutes if you were trying. Now, learning what the functions means, that's a whole different story. But at the same time, if you went in knowing what the functions were or what they meant, then you would be able to easily understand this model system. All right, so yeah, I think that's a good place to stop with just this theory for right now. I am going to save this, so give me a sec. Save it as Twitch model 1. Cool. So does anyone have any questions? Any type question? Doesn't have to be about the model. It can just be anything in general. having a hard time identifying if somebody is an INFP or ISFP. Is there any obvious difference you could point out? Um, ISFPs are prone towards a little bit of naivety, because when it comes to that third function, they're a little bit shy or awkward about their introverted intuition, and they struggle to understand interpretations sometimes, but it doesn't cause them panic in the same way that ESFPs do. So ESFPs, when they misinterpret introverted intuition, body signals, social messages, these sorts of things, you're going to find that they start to panic or get stressed. Oh, what does this person think about me? What are they thinking about me? This is why ESFPs and ESTPs tend to be drawn towards things like drama or like social gossip, these sorts of things, because there's meaning, and it's can be back and forth, lots of high energy tension, this sort of thing. With the ISFP, it's more like they're kind of naive towards this introverted intuition, and that they don't get stressed by it, but they also don't pay a ton of attention to it. Whereas with INFPs are often naive when it comes to the realistic nature of their life. So one of the archetypes you'll find with INFPs is that they're willing to sacrifice the realistic functionality of their living in favor or preference of their FI identity. So they throw SI and TE out the window a lot of the times when they are trying to express their identity. What does this look like? Well, it looks like the goth girl who won't give up her Hot Topic look to work at her new business because she values her identity, appearance, and and just general FI more than the realistic SITE applications of her life. INFPs are naive when it comes to living a lot of the times. They can struggle when it comes to sacrificing things in the realistic world for functionality. Whereas with ISFPs, it's more like they're naive in their interactions with other people if they're not really careful about it. So yeah. At Vino. I don't know who that is. System is much better. Well, thank you. I'm gonna upload this as a video to YouTube probably tomorrow or the next day or something, and I hope people like it. I'm not saying that this needs to be a system, but to me it's just how would I reimagine. This is just thought experiment. Will an INTJ 8-wing 9 have more ENTJ tendencies than say an INTJ 5 will? Yes. Now again, I'm no Enneagram. There's a cell phone ringing in the other room. I'm sorry if you can hear that. I'm no Enneagram expert, but the Enneagram 8s tend to be very direct. I think that INTJs that score is 8 may have not found comfort in their introverted intuition to its maximum. Or it's almost like life or their general motivations have forced them into using TE more so than the NI in a almost like an unhealthy way. This isn't to say that INTJ 8s are unhealthy. That's not what I'm trying to imply. But INTJs at their best usually aren't going to be TE pushy all the time. That's usually, if they're TE pushy all the time, or they're directive or focused or authoritarian type of things all the time, it's because TE is slightly over preferred compared to FI at that current point in their life. When you find FI balance with TE, you'll see that INTJs really mellow out. Whereas INTJs in the growth pattern of an INTJ usually looks like this. They're really awkward, mysterious, eccentric children up until like 12 or 13. They're weird, imaginary play worlds, these sorts of things. Then the TE kind of starts to kick in. They're like, oh, okay, look at this TE, but they're really bad at it. So they get really pushy with TE up until like 20 to even their 30s if they're not careful. There's a point where TE just kind of kicks up and they start to weaponize it. And I think that if TE gets to the point where it's seen so much as a useful tool without ever developing down into introverted feeling, then you're going to see that the INTJ stays in that aggressive 8-like behavior. Or maybe life forced them to be like that. And it's like a defense mechanism. And they never kind of mellow down or mellow back out into the introverted, intuitive, more perceptive type of manner. Now, again, INTJs can be very go-getter, focused, achievers type of things. But I find that as they age and progress, they mellow out into the FI, which you don't really see that with ENTJs, for example. So ENTJs are at their healthiest when they're in usually like an 8 type of behavior or mindset. Now, it's hard, again, to cross-correlate Enneagram and MBTI because of just, just is. But I do think that INTJs aren't probably at their 100% best if they find themselves in a constant 8 state. How would you distinguish an INFP 4-wing 5 and an INFP 9-wing 1? I don't know much about 9-wing 1s. I know about 4-wing 5s because I'm a 5-wing 4 INTJ myself. Kyle, if you're an INTJ typed as an 8, you may be at a point in your life where TE is just really strong. And there's nothing wrong with that. And maybe finding that NI balance. Maybe you could be an ENTJ. Maybe you are a TE dominant. Because remember, when it comes to introversion and extroversion, it's not about social aspect. It's about cognitive aspect. And which direction is your mind facing? If your mind is facing inwards, and NI is your dominant function, it's going to cost more energy to go out into TE to be that kind of aggressive 8 type of behavior. That's what you need to ask yourself. When you engage in the typical 8 behaviors, does it cost you mental energy? If it costs you mental energy to engage in 8 type behaviors, then you might want to ask yourself, is TE my secondary function? Because it might be. I don't know. Maybe I got confused there. Yeah. So for an INTJ, 8 behavior would often cost them energy. Because even if an INTJ is, you're a 5 and you're progressing towards 8, it would cost you energy. This doesn't mean that all INTJs are 5s. Some can be 8s. But I'm really skeptical of the idea that INTJs who type themselves solidly as 8s are really at like a great point, if that makes sense. I hate to use the word like unhealthy, but I think a lot of the times when we go into 8, it's so much more noticeable. It's like using TE. When a 5, 5-wing 4, 5-wing 6 goes into 8, it's like, oh, look at me, I'm being assertive, or I'm being this. So look how much of this I am. I'm definitely assertive, or I'm definitely aggressive when I need to be. But at the same time, then you hang out with an ENTJ and you're like, no, I'm not. I hang out with an ENTJ very frequently. And for the past year, I've made good friends with an ENTJ that I typed myself, actually. And I learned very quickly that my TE is nowhere near, like, he's an 8, and it's nowhere near that. Like, I thought I was kind of a little bit of that, and then I was like, it's not even close. And I think that's really the thing that we can distinguish when we see people of certain types, especially ones who are confident in their dominant function. Because I do think there is a level of confidence development in your dominant function, and this is something that I might talk about in a future live stream or video or something, is that you can be unconfident or unconfident in your dominant function, and you can be confident in it, and that can really drastically change how you present as a type. Because if you have confident NI versus unconfident NI, or confident TE versus unconfident TE, it's going to be 2 totally different things. Now, systems like objective personality promote masculine and feminine. I think they're like, it's something like that, but not the same, because I think that it's changeable or malleable, which is the reason I don't like their masculine feminine system, is that I think that confidence, or the lack thereof, in a dominant or any function is something that has to be learned, trained, or developed, and it's not something that you should strive essentially to stay within. If I saw an unconfident TE dom, what does that look like? What does an unconfident TE dom look like? Probably someone who's really aggressive and insecure about their authority or leadership, these sorts of things. And that, I wouldn't describe that as feminine. I would describe that as still being masculine. It's just aggressive and unconfident. It'd be good to get a video talking about how NI DOMs can develop their NI further. So Kyle, sorry, someone's mowing the lawn outside. I live in an apartment. I think it's really important for people to not stress trying to develop your dominant function. If your dominant function is your dominant function, you shouldn't have to develop it. You should focus on developing the other parts of your psyche that support your dominant function. What does your auxiliary and tertiary function do for your dominant function? Your dominant function is just your lens in which you engage within the world. It doesn't take conscious effort. You just kind of do it. So that, it's just going to be very natural for you to take in information that way. Now, what do you do with that information? What are you doing with those decisions? That's where your secondary and tertiary function come into play, and those are going to be the most important for developing as a type. Now, an ENTJ might want to develop introverted intuition, just as an INTJ might want to develop extroverted thinking. Developing your auxiliary axis while being aware of the negative repercussions of your fourth function is like the summary of how to develop as a personality type. Don't put effort into your dominant function. It's natural. It's easy. You're gonna be fine at it. You don't, if you're an NI dominant type, you don't want to be more of an NI dominant type. You just go focus on the other things. INTJs have 5 and 8, and INFPs have 4 and 9. Yeah, I'm very skeptical of Enneagram at times, but at the same time, I like it in some sense. Can an INFJ type 5 struggle have unconfident FE during teenage years? Yeah, of course. That auxiliary function, especially in the introverted types where you have to force yourself to go into extroversion, can be really unconfident. Because look at extroverts. Extroverts, when they develop their auxiliary function, have to go inward. So that doesn't come off as insecurity to other people more often than not, because they're not going to be using it to interact with others more often than not. Instead, they're going to be using it to reflect within themselves or find out what it is they're feeling or thinking, these sorts of things. So for an extrovert, usually when you're using an extrovert function, it's going to involve using it with or even against some other person, and therefore it can appear more unconfident. FE is something that requires active energy and use for an INFJ because it exists in that unconscious extroverted attitude. So yeah, it's going to take something that's going to require effort. You'll find that it becomes more natural as long as you use it in unison with introverted thinking, and that you don't try to like force yourself to just do extroverted feeling. You allow extroverted feeling and introverted thinking to have that counterbalance. I am really sorry about that lawnmower out there. I'm sure you can probably hear it. If not, then that's fine. But I am probably going to wrap up the stream here soon because it's been about an hour. So I will say to everyone who's here, I know there's like 16, 15, 16 of you. I really appreciate you stopping into this live stream. I'm hoping to do weekly live streams here on Twitch. My general goal, what I want to do moving forward as a content creator, is replace one of my weekly videos with a live stream. So I can do the live stream and then upload it to YouTube or upload the highlights to YouTube the next day. So that's what I'd like to do. So if you enjoyed this here, I'd really appreciate you letting me know the feedback, that sort of thing. I really enjoy doing the live streams because it takes less mental effort and energy for me because I don't have to do editing. And I really hate all that like editing and putting things together. For me, I made this little overlay that you see on screen, in like an hour or two, and that was it. I don't have to do it over again. What day will you stream usually? I haven't fully decided. It's probably going to be either Monday or Thursday because I'd like to maintain my upload schedule to YouTube, which is Tuesday, Fridays. So it'll likely be Monday or Thursday, and then I'll upload it to YouTube the next day. If I continue to grow on Twitch at the rate that I am now, I will be a Twitch partner in a few weeks, maybe. Because I'm almost at that point already, just because I have a little bit of a following from YouTube. And they have a 24-hour re-upload clause, which means that if you recorded or you did a live stream on Twitch, you can't put it on YouTube for 24 hours. So I will do the stream. Why was the original 4-letter code decided? Wouldn't something like this be more intuitive? Yeah, I don't know why Briggs, chose to do it that way. I understood why it works, because I think if you fully understand the 4-letter coding and all the kind of mental gymnastics you have to do to come to the conclusions that she did, like, oh, J is for the function that's in the judging slot, and it means that it's extroverted, and P means the perceiving slot's extroverted. But if you're an introvert, it's going to be the second thing, and you're like, I get it, and it makes sense, but you have to do some mental gymnastics to get to that point. I think with a model like this, it's straight to the point. All right, let's look at an ESFP. They have sensing first, feeling second, thinking third, and intuition last, and they're an extroverted type. So sensing is going to be extroverted, feeling is going to be introverted, thinking is going to be extroverted, intuition is going to be introverted. All right, I know that they're really good at sensing. I know that they're not so great at intuition, and I know that feeling and thinking are pretty balanced. Like, those are pretty apparent right off the bat in this system. Whereas if you look at an INTJ, you go, okay, they're introverted, intuitive, thinking, and judging. Well, I know they're a judging type, and I know they have a strong preference for intuition and thinking, as opposed to, in my system, thinking and feeling are relatively balanced, which is, I think, how it should be. An INTJ isn't thinking super strong. They're thinking, feeling balanced with bad sensing. Slight preference for thinking over feeling. 60-40 as opposed to 80-20, which is where we are at now. So that's my model, my proposition. I hope this made sense for you. So if you enjoyed this live stream, let me know. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you all so much for joining me here today. You can see this live stream on YouTube probably tomorrow. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a good one. See you.